Hello friends and subscribers, welcome back to Readings in Impact Investing. My name is Daniel Rosehill. This is a brand new YouTube channel and an accompanying podcast in the works for reading important material from the world of impact investing to make it available to people who like to take in this kind of material through the format of audio, whether you like to listen to it at the gym or when you're out walking or commuting or whatever works for you, really. That is my idea, because I think there's a lot of really important reports being issued in this field quite regularly, usually in the format of kind of glossy PDFs. And I personally spend a lot of time and effort printing these and putting these on my shelf. But when I want to listen back to them, I often wish there was some way. I find audio really works for me. I know that's just me, but anyway, people who feel similarly can subscribe to pick up the material this way. So this is a report called Next Frontiers: How Outcomes Partnerships Enable Better Outcomes and Better Value. This is one of the input papers to the Impact Taskforce. People who listen to that will recall that the Impact Taskforce, also known as the ITF, put out a report just recently called State of Play 2023, and that was kind of an end-of-year summary of where we are since the Impact Task Force was collected or assembled in 2021, sort of 2 years, what's been the progress on the two work streams. And one of the things towards the end, I think it was chapter 4, also called Next Frontiers, I believed, they really had very encouraging words to say about outcomes partnerships, and there was some amazing statistic that they actually mobilized 10x, or they achieved capital mobilization ratios of just over 10x. In other words, for every dollar spent of government money that would traditionally achieve 1x, they actually achieved 10 times the value. So these are basically results-based financing, or pay for success is a common acronym as well, and there's a lot of hope that these can really help governments to achieve social good much more cost effectively, and in doing so, because there's a limit to how much public money there is, scale up public good delivery. This particular input paper was authored by Bridges Outcomes Partnerships, and it's not massively long. It's about 30 pages. Now, because I'm reading this, there's going to be, I tend to kind of skip. There are some visual elements. I'm looking at page 7. They have a nice little flowchart, and I try to either read those, explain what they are, or just omit them, depending on if there's a way I can sort of just narrate them. So this will be mostly the body text, and there may be occasionally parts skipped, but hopefully we can still get to a lot of important information. I'm going to start with the executive summary on page 3 of the document. This paper argues for the broader adoption of outcomes partnerships, a type of results-based commissioning that is attracting more and more attention globally. Governments, donors, and broader outcomes funders around the world find themselves dealing with increasingly complex and intractable social challenges, at a time when most are also grappling with significant spending constraints. This is forcing them to innovate and do more with less. Outcomes partnerships shift the focus of government and donor commissioning from paying for specific inputs or activities to paying for specific, meaningful, person-centered milestones. They are proving to be particularly effective in complex areas of human services where individuals are facing multiple challenges simultaneously and require more personalized and more holistic support. In this paper, we provide detailed case studies that show how these projects are already helping to improve lives and improve the effectiveness of public spending. We focused primarily on the UK, the most developed outcomes partnership market, and Japan, where the market is rapidly growing, with some additional examples of projects in Africa. Each case study outlines the problems the government was struggling to solve, then explains how the outcomes partnership tried to tackle it, what the results were, and what was learned as a result. The value of outcomes partnerships lies in their ability to align stakeholders around shared goals and foster social innovation through collaboration, flexibility in delivery, and accountability. Despite the clear potential of outcomes partnerships, there are still some sizable barriers to their broader adoption: cultural, practical, and political. Overcoming these barriers will require system changes at 3 levels. At the program level, the micro, it emphasizes the importance of collaborative design, flexible delivery, and clear accountability. At the structural level, the meso, it calls for reforms in areas like budgeting, data systems, and procurement practices. And finally, at the macro level, it highlights needs for greater dissemination of knowledge, cultivation of champions, and management of political dynamics. In this paper, we provide practical recommendations on how to do this, drawing on our case study examples. By taking a systemic approach across 3 levels, the paper argues that outcomes partnerships can drive enduring transformation in human services globally. Section 1, Introduction to Outcomes Partnerships. In an ever-changing world of growing populations, shifting demographics, and constant social upheaval, the challenge faced by governments of delivering high-quality human services, broadly speaking, services that aim to meet human needs and improve overall quality of life, is getting larger and more complex every year. External shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine have intensified some of these challenges while also putting even greater pressure on public spending. As such, governments, policymakers, and delivery organisations often find themselves trying to achieve more with less. And the traditional approach to public service delivery, which typically involves prescribing a single standardised solution to a specific problem, is increasingly proving unfit for purpose, particularly in complex areas where individuals are dealing with multiple challenges simultaneously. The net result is that all too often we fail to provide the right support to some of those who need it most. Over the last decade, however, a new approach to service delivery has emerged that can help to combat some of these challenges. These programs differ from traditional human service delivery in that they shift the focus from paying for specific inputs or activities to paying for specific, meaningful, person-centered milestones. Establishing a shared vision around particular milestones enables better alignment and closer collaboration between governments and broader outcome funders, delivery organisations, and other stakeholders. It allows for greater flexibility and personalisation in delivery, and it creates very clear accountability for improving people's lives. It has proven to be particularly effective in areas like labour, health and education, where a one-size-fits-all approach is less effective. In an area when the efficiency and effectiveness of public spending is under scrutiny as never before, these outcomes partnerships can be a transformative way of enabling innovation in public services and delivering both better outcomes for individuals and better value for public money. This paper is intended to provide valuable insights to inform the global conversation about outcomes partnerships. Drawing on interviews with practitioners, detailed case studies, and an expanding data set, its goal is to provide practical, evidence-based recommendations on how to design and deliver outcomes partnerships and how to implement this approach on a much wider scale. Over time, this will help to mainstream the delivery of person-centered, strengths-oriented services that tangibly improve people's lives and utilise the state's finite resources in the most effective and efficient way. Understanding outcomes-based approaches. Outcomes partnerships are increasingly recognised as an effective way to unlock social innovation and align multiple stakeholders around shared goals centred around improving people's lives. Over the last decade, a number of different outcomes-based approaches have been trialled. These approaches, referred to variously as social impact bonds, SIBs, payment by results, social outcomes contracts, and outcomes partnerships, are all based on the same underlying principle, paying for the milestones and outcomes achieved for people served, rather than paying for inputs and services, as was the traditional model of commissioning and delivery. However, although these terms are often used interchangeably, they actually span a wide variety of delivery vehicles, payment structures, project outcomes, and sources of pre-financing funding, some of which have been more successful than others. In this paper, we will be focusing exclusively on a specific type of outcomes-based approach that we call outcomes partnerships, except for historical examples that were given a different name at the time. Outcomes partnerships are grounded in several key principles. By linking payment to milestones and outcomes that are fundamentally aligned with the stakeholders' vision of what they want the program to achieve, instead of a defined set of inputs, everyone's focus shifts to achieving that shared vision and the desired impact. This sets the foundation for collaboration and accountability. Now, I think that's actually a really important paragraph, so I'm just going to read it one more time for emphasis. Outcomes partnerships are grounded in several key principles, and the first one, By linking payment to milestones and outcomes that are fundamentally aligned with the stakeholders' visions of what they want the program to achieve, instead of a defined set of inputs, everyone's focus shifts to achieving that shared vision and the desired impact. This sets a foundation for collaboration and accountability. At the same time, it unlocks the capacity for social innovation in delivery, because without a prescribed set of activities, delivery consortia have the flexibility and the autonomy to innovate and adapt their delivery model as needed over time, drawing on their expertise and the data they collect to create individualized solutions that will enable them to achieve the desired outcomes. An analysis of different outcomes partnerships around the world suggests 3 key elements are needed for their success: collaborative design, flexible delivery, and shared accountability. Collaborative design. Instead of trying to design specific solutions to fix narrow issues, working with local groups and expert partners to agree on an overall shared vision, grounded in clear, quantifiable metrics and milestones that represent genuine improvement in people's lives. Flexible delivery. Instead of trying to impose standardized, clearly specified solutions, giving delivery teams the freedom to tailor their solutions to local and individual circumstances so that they can learn from what works and keep iterating to make programs progressively more effective. Clear accountability. Instead of focusing evaluations on short-term KPIs linked to activity or inputs, or on long-term goals that are distant and binary, agreeing clear metrics that correspond to tangible improvements in people's lives and reporting transparently against them, while also working to understand the broader systemic impact of each project and teasing out the lessons learned to inform future projects. Creating an environment that is conducive to these elements requires trust and collaboration between all parties involved, but ultimately this approach can facilitate the creation of people-centered, strength-based services, because the ecosystem and infrastructure of the partnerships gives those closest to delivery the freedom to center the process on individuals being served and to together identify the most effective solutions. Another key component of outcomes partnerships is a focus on iterative learning and data-enabled decision-making. Robust data collection and analysis enable stakeholders to track progress, evaluate effectiveness, and make informed adjustments to strategies and intervention. In other words, data is an essential tool for understanding which delivery approaches are effective and for affirming that the desired outcomes are being achieved. So carefully designing and tracking meaningful milestones that mark progress towards improving people's lives is critical. Data collection must ultimately be targeted at measuring progress along the steps that are most critical in supporting the person's positive journey. Done well, this should facilitate evidence-based decision-making and continuous improvement. The ethos of these outcomes partnerships differs significantly from the earliest outcomes-based programs, which were called Social Impact Bonds, or SIBs, acronym is SIB. Here the focus was very much on the financing mechanism that allowed social investors to support projects, promoted as a way to mitigate risk and attract additional capital. Outcomes partnerships strive to improve the delivery of human services first and foremost, building on existing knowledge and expertise, while fostering innovation in both delivery and funding. The legal structure is purely a means to an end, that is, to achieve better outcomes for individuals and improve the effectiveness of public spending. Why focus on outcomes partnerships? In the traditional human services model, funding is typically allocated based on the delivery of predefined inputs such as the number of hours of therapy or the quantity of resources provided. So there is no real accountability for whether the program actually succeeds in improving people's lives. It can also lead to a siloed approach to service provision, where each delivery organization focuses solely on fulfilling their specific obligations with no incentive to collaborate with other stakeholders or work towards shared outcomes. This makes it very difficult to coordinate or integrate services, which is especially problematic for complex social issues that require a more holistic approach. For example, a person experiencing homelessness may be in that situation for a multiplicity of reasons, for example, an unstable family home, mental health issues, substance abuse, etc. Depending on what those reasons are, each person may need a different combination of support services to help them move into and sustain more stable accommodation. Collaboration between the various stakeholders is critical to making this process as effective as possible. In addition, the prescriptive nature of input-based models hampers innovation and stifles creativity in service delivery. When delivery partners are paid for a defined set of inputs, it is much harder for them to adopt their model, even if it transpires that the model is not working for certain individuals or communities. Without the flexibility to explore innovative approaches, they cannot tailor interventions to the unique needs of the individuals or communities they serve. Furthermore, there is rarely a robust measurement of outcomes and meaningful milestones, so funders are left with limited insight into the effectiveness of their funding, making it challenging to determine whether they are getting good value for money. By contrast, outcomes partnerships offer a transformative shift. By focusing on delivering demonstrable improvements to people's lives, measured through meaningful milestones along that journey. By fostering a culture of collaboration, innovation, and adaptability, these partnerships can unlock the full potential of human services, enabling better outcomes for all. Barriers to mainstreaming outcomes partnerships. However, despite this clear potential for creating impact and fostering innovation, outcomes partnerships are not yet mainstream. So what are the key barriers hindering their broader implementation? Clearly, there are some legal and structural issues that are specific to particular countries. However, we believe that there are 4 core barriers that exist globally, creating a reinforcing cycle that those working in service delivery experience on a day-to-day basis. And this is page 7 of the report, and these are the barriers. Knowledge and understanding, which is a system-level issue. Limited knowledge and support for outcomes partnerships at a system level. Budgeting and procurement, input-focused contracting, low engagement on request for proposal and quote prior to tender, incentives to spend full budget in year, and preference for cash savings over cost avoidance, and then knowledge and understanding a local level constraint, data management and availability, rigid contract specification, push for value for money based on inputs, perception of wasted public funds, worsening outcomes, and inappropriate service delivery. And I think it's really important to look at that diagram on page 7 because it flows in a specific way. But I'm going to just focus on the text as I said at the start. Budgeting and procurement. Budgets are usually designed for predictable spend, typically planning and spending within a given financial year. Public sector officials are often not rewarded for saving money in their allocated budget. Instead, they are incentivized to ensure that their budgets are fully spent every year to avoid budget restrictions in the following year. By contrast, outcomes partnerships typically require multi-year investment with a more uncertain payment profile. While spend over the life of the contract is typically capped, providing certainty to governments, the timing of payments is unpredictable. Due to the types of services delivered, there is often a gap between when a service is delivered and when an outcome is achieved. In a homelessness prevention service, for example, the desired outcome might be that a person sustains accommodation for 12 months, so the payment will necessarily fall 12 months after the service has been delivered. I think this is actually really important, so I'm just going to reread this point here about the certainty that is achieved by capping the payments. By contrast, outcomes partnerships typically require a multi-year investment with a more uncertain payment profile. While spend over the life of the contract is typically capped, providing crucial certainty to government, the timing of payments is unpredictable. Due to the types of services delivered, there is often a gap between when a service is delivered and when an outcome is achieved. In a homelessness prevention service, for example, the desired outcome might be that a person sustains accommodation for 12 months, so the payment will necessarily fall 12 months after the service has been delivered. More flexible procurement practices at a local level are a key enabler of innovative approaches to commissioning, including outcomes partnerships. But procurement practices tend to be relatively rigid, primarily focused on procuring the highly specified inputs. Greater flexibility would enable greater participation from smaller, more local organisations, reduce the administrative burden for both commissioners and bidders, and encourage a more relational approach to contracts. Next barrier is data management and availability. Data collection and analysis is at the core of any outcomes-based partnership. However, the traditional approach to human services has not required rigorous data collection on outcomes. So the necessary data management systems may not yet be in place, let alone systems that can talk to each other, which is essential for greater collaboration. Often, we do not even have data on the baseline effectiveness of existing systems. Leveraging existing systems and improving upon them is critical to mainstreaming outcomes partnerships. Encouraging better data collection, both by governments and existing delivery organizations, would help to provide a solid foundation for the establishment of outcomes partnerships in the future. Next limitation is knowledge and understanding. There are still many decision makers in government who are unfamiliar with outcomes partnerships, or perhaps they see them as expensive or risky, often based on misconceptions from alternative approaches to outcomes contracting. Analysis comparing commissioning for inputs-based versus outcomes-based contracts indicates that both require the same amount of time from outcomes funders. So it is a misconception that paying for outcomes automatically increases the transaction costs of launching a service. A critical part of scaling this approach is having increased knowledge and understanding of the features and benefits that outcomes partnerships can bring. Next limitation is political dynamics. Politics may also be a barrier to the widespread adoption of outcomes partnerships. Success often depends on securing support from a high-level champion in government, as well as support from a motivated civil service, informed by knowledge and technical expertise. As such, the multi-year nature of outcomes partnerships creates a degree of political risk. Changes of government or sudden shifts in the political landscape can hamper progress, either because previous champions are no longer in office, or because the current incumbents are unwilling to support initiatives that will not bear fruit until after their term in office. Similarly, organizational challenges within government can lead to the stalling or even the cancellation of initiatives. This instability undermines the sustained support which is needed for their success. Another potential issue is that certain policies might be seen as partisan, making opposition politicians reluctant or unwilling to support them, although this way of working has tended to achieve relatively widespread cross-party support in most countries where it has been attempted. Real-world examples. Illustrative examples of outcomes partnerships. To illustrate the nature and benefits of outcomes partnerships, here follows a series of case studies. These case studies show how outcomes partnerships are established, which parties they bring together, and how they have been able to achieve better impact than other approaches. Spanning both high-income and low-to-middle-income countries, as well as the three sectors of focus, health, labour and education, these real-world examples demonstrate the innovation and the remarkable societal and environmental outcomes that can be achieved through these collaborations. We begin with two country-level case studies in the UK and Japan. These analyses highlight the overarching policy frameworks and strategies that have supported impactful outcomes in a high-income country context, before zooming into specific examples of outcomes partnerships in these countries. Subsequently, we review three distinct individual program case studies in Nigeria, Uganda, and Kenya. These detailed examinations offer a nuanced account of the challenges and successes encountered in diverse low to middle income settings. By dissecting each government's design, implementation, and outcomes, we show the unique contributions of outcomes partnerships to societal and environmental progress in these areas. Through this range of case studies, we hope to illuminate the diverse ways in which outcomes partnerships can enable positive change across the globe. Section 2. Outcomes Commissioning in the UK. Market context. The United Kingdom has a population of 67 million people with GDP per capita of £36,000, that is 46,000 US dollars. Historically, the UK has had some of the best public services in the world and a strong social safety net. Government currently spends around 45% of GDP on public services each year, with the highest proportion going on social protection, public education and universal healthcare through the National Health Service or NHS. Over the last 2 decades, however, there has been a growing recognition that these services are most effective in situations where government can find a solution that works and do it to everyone. For example, rolling out a vaccine, or removing an appendix. Sadly, services tend to be less effective with deep-rooted social issues where what works is different for everyone, such as helping families stay together, the management of chronic health conditions, or homelessness prevention. In these areas, we need more personalised adaptive solutions and better collaboration across government agencies. Key developments to date. Successive UK governments have looked to catalyse innovation and collaborate from both the third sector and local government to address these more complex issues. In April 2000, the then Chancellor Gordon Brown launched the Social Investment Taskforce. In the subsequent years, multiple departments set up their own innovation units, which were eventually brought together within the Cabinet Office in 2006 as the Office for Civil Society. When the Conservative government came to power in 2010, it also embraced social innovation through its white paper, Open Public Services, and continued to seek ways to make service delivery more flexible, accountable, and local. During this period, interest grew in outcomes partnerships as a potential way to 1. Increase innovation in public service delivery through outcomes-based commissioning, 2. Improve cross-government working and encourage co-payment and therefore joint accountability for success across different areas of government, different ministerial portfolios, and 3. Increase the early adoption of complex social problems like chronic homelessness and recidivism. As we can see from Figure 2, considerable progress has been made over the past decade. Since the launch of the first social impact bond in Peterborough in 2010, there has been over £20 billion in funds committed by the UK government to projects that have some elements of payment tied to results, although just £0.5 billion would have been referred to as a SIB. Over the same period, at least £206 million has been committed directly through various UK government outcomes funds to outcomes partnerships. So just to point out here that number 206 million is about 0.5 billion referred to as a SIB or an SIB. A key development was the government's launch in 2012 of the Impact Wholesale Bank Big Society Capital BSC, with the remit to build the impact investment market and provide funds for outcomes partnerships. Since then, BSC alone has helped to fund 90 outcomes partnerships, spanning issues of child and family welfare, education, employment and training, health, homelessness and criminal justice. These projects have involved over 180 commissioners, 220 social sector delivery partners, and ultimately benefited over 55,000 people across the United Kingdom. BSC's 2022 report, Outcomes for All, found that for every pound spent on outcomes payments to date, these projects have generated £10.12 in benefit and £2.85 in direct fiscal savings or cost avoidance. I'm just going to read that because that's a very, very impressive number. BSC's 2022 report entitled Outcomes for All found that for every pound spent on outcomes payments to date, these projects have generated £10.12 in total benefit. So again, a multiplier of 10, just over 10. And that report is called Outcomes for All, 10 Years of Social Outcomes Contracts from Big Society Capital. And there's also a reference here in footnote 8 to Stanworth and Hickman in 2022, the value created by social outcomes contracts in the UK. And there's a hyperlink in the report so folks can look up those further data if they're interested. So figure 2 on page 11 is a timeline of key developments between 2010 and 2021 in the sphere, number of outcomes projects, and this data comes from Big Society Capital. In 2010, national budget commits funds from unclaimed asset to an impact wholesaler. 2011, Department for Work and Pensions Innovation Fund launched. 2012, Greater London Authority Rough Sleeping Programme launched, and as well as Big Society Capital launched, and the Cabinet Office for Civil Society, a Social Outcomes Fund of £20 million launched. 2013, Social Results Fund, £25 million. National Lottery Community Fund, Commissioning Better Outcomes Fund, £40 million was launched. 2015, Big Society Capital and the National Lottery create Access, the Foundation for Social Investment. 2016, Office for Civil Society selects Oxford University's Blavatnik School of Government to create the Government Outcomes Lab. Office for Civil Society launches Life Chances Fund of £80 million. Lessons learned. With over 100 outcomes-based projects now launched, impacting thousands of people, there has been a significant evolution in understanding what these partnerships can achieve and how they should be set up for success, from cashable savings to measurable impact. Much of the early dialogue on outcomes projects focused on cashable savings, linking outcomes payments to the value of that outcome to government, usually in terms of how much money it will directly save. This model, which was deployed across several projects, encountered multiple challenges, particularly around setting a baseline, attributing causation, and quantifying cost avoidance. An alternative model arose with the influential Greater London Authority Rough Sleeping Programme, the London Homelessness SIB, which was launched in 2012. In the words of Tim Gray, a key architect of the contract, this SIB moved away from the notion of cashable savings, a feature of the Peterborough SIB and an issue that has dogged SIBs. We acknowledge that more money needed to be spent on people experiencing chronic homelessness. They deserved better than they had experienced. The impact bond was designed not as a first principle to save money. Rather, the SIB was intended to ensure that funding was spent effectively to achieve what this difficult to reach group needed. At the very least, it would be better than spending in ways that clearly had not worked previously. Rather than focusing on saving money and or securing alternative sources of finance, this approach was more about making sure that the money, which governments and broader donors invested in services, was spent as efficiently and effectively as possible. This SIB identified outcomes that made a difference to those experiencing chronic homelessness, such as sustained accommodation, employment and education, and paid for those as they were achieved. It established an alternative model, now used widely, where payment is linked to the achievement of progress milestones and outcomes most relevant to the individual. As a result, the focus of outcomes partnerships today is not the financing model, but the impact they can have on the lives of some of the UK's most vulnerable people. And again, I'm going to read this little end of this paragraph because I think it's super important. As a result, the focus of outcomes partnerships today is not on the financing model, but on the impact they can have on the lives of some of the UK's most vulnerable people. A central team with clear strategy, ownership and sponsorship helps to bring stakeholders together. In the UK, an absolutely critical enabler was the establishment of a central team with responsibility to bring these different stakeholders together, pool funding both in terms of pre-financing and outcome funding, and agree shared goals, distribute the funding, track performance, and analyse impact and learnings through commissioned evaluations. In the UK, this was achieved through the creation of a specialist team within the Cabinet's Office for Civil Society. Government has a key role to play, for example, by pre-financing social sector organisations to deliver these programmes. Although much of the early dialogue around outcomes partnerships focused on catalysing private sector investment, in practice a wide variety of funding sources and structures have been employed across different projects. Some government funds, such as the Future Builders Fund, offered loans directly to charities, while others, like the Life Chances Fund, paid only once outcomes were achieved. Where investment has earned a return, it has typically been at close to the cost of government borrowing. It has also typically been managed through a pooled fund of pre-financing for three reasons: to reduce fundraising and other transaction costs of individual projects, to reduce investor risk premium by spreading exposure across a portfolio of projects, and to create market infrastructure, for example, the development of a standardized template contract. The reasons that government chose to be a founder investor, pari passu with all the others, were to receive full transparency every 3 months of all impact investment activity, to attract external funding and expertise alongside government from other partners, to share the cost of managing the investments with other organisations, to ensure the risk appetite of the fund encouraged genuine innovation and offered more flexible options that were currently available across the market, and to share equally in any gains made from successful investment. For example, the first fund to launch in 2008, the Social Entrepreneurs Fund, was created by the Cabinet Office as a founder investor, then raised matching funds from a range of social investors. It offered pre-financing to delivery consortia to design, deliver and innovate during service delivery until the outcomes payments are achieved and paid for by the government. Over its lifetime, the fund earned a net break-even position on outcomes projects. Subsequently, the government created Big Society Capital, which has taken on this pre-financing role. Another important role for government is the pooling of funds for outcomes from different departments. Since these projects typically require coordination and collaboration between multiple government agencies, one of the most fundamental issues is how to spread the costs and benefits across different departmental budgets. In the UK, the most effective way of doing this has proved to be the creation of co-commissioning and shared outcomes funds, which recognise that benefits sit across different departments and funding needs to be pooled, while helping to align different agencies around shared goals. This makes the process of commissioning and managing these projects significantly easier. The creation of an external expert body to help government develop an infrastructure which supports outcomes and impact-based funding allocation. In the UK, the Cabinet Office's Office for Civil Society created an external advisory body to help government launch more outcomes-based contracts. It ran an open public procurement process and selected Oxford University's Blavatnik School of Government, who were expected to raise matching funding. The newly created Government Outcomes Lab identified 3 objectives for outcomes-based approaches to improve collaboration, prevention, and innovation across government. As identified above, many parts of government identified that they did not get good enough data on any public service projects to inform future funding decisions effectively. So the Government Outcomes Lab built a specialist team to collect and share data on outcomes-based projects while encouraging better data across all types of projects. Outcomes partnerships have 3 key advantages over traditional projects. As outcome partnerships have matured, it has become clear that their real value lies in their capacity to enable more individualized, fit-for-purpose service delivery for complex issues, which results in better lives, better services, and better value for public money. The model adopted by Bridges Outcomes Partnerships, which builds on learnings from Tim Gray's work, involves partnering with and funding social enterprises and charities to deliver services according to 3 key principles. Those are collaborative design, flexible delivery, and clear accountability. Collaborative design. All these projects aim to bring together civil servants, experts, design practitioners, and critically, the people which they are serving. Those responsible for commissioning services are incentivized to work across government in the interests of those who serve, breaking down traditional barriers between policy areas and departmental silos. There are different ways to achieve this collaboration. Initially, social impact bonds, SIBs, were often established through an intermediary, for example, social finance for the Peterborough SIB, who worked with the commissioner to design the SIB, source the investors, and plan for implementation up front. As the model has matured, however, this has become a more direct and iterative process. A commissioner works directly to procure a design partner or a delivery consortium, typically with existing social investors, and the consortium then works to implement the contract over its length. This enables a more relational, agile approach between commissioners and delivery partners. Where the partnership requires deep place-based system change, a backbone organisation to coordinate the partnership might be created, as for the Greater Manchester Homes Partnership below. Flexible delivery. Without the restrictive specifications of a fee-for-service contract, outcomes partnerships enable organisations to be much more responsive to the needs of the people they serve and the input of their staff. They can shift budget to improve services based on user feedback and revise services that are not working. Perhaps just as importantly, they can make investments in staff, like improving surge capacity, investing in training, and changing supervisory ratios so that staff are properly supported, improving their effectiveness and reducing attrition. Clear accountability. The third key element of outcomes partnerships is their clear accountability for improving lives, usually measured in terms of the impact on those who access the service. Because payment is linked to outcomes, there is an incentive to collect meaningful data on what is and what isn't working on the service user's own terms and to improve the service based upon those findings. Impact evaluations in outcomes partnerships are typically more user-centered as they seek to understand the complex drivers of the outcomes rather than, as is so often the case in public services, isolate the efficiency of a single intervention. This shift towards transparency and accountability in outcomes partnerships has broader system benefits, since data on what has and hasn't worked can be shared to inform future projects. Conclusion. In an environment of macroeconomic uncertainty and tightening fiscal resources, a key priority of any UK government in the next decade will be shaping world-class public services fit for the 21st century. The UK's decade of investment in outcomes partnerships makes it well placed to take advantage of these clear benefits of collaborative design, flexible delivery and clear accountability to innovate and test new ideas, collaborate across government and invest in early prevention at scale. Collaborative design and focus the Greater Manchester Homes Partnerships. The challenge. When Andy Burnham was elected Mayor of Greater Manchester in 2017, his highest profile pledge was to eliminate rough sleeping in the region. But to have any hope of turning this promise into reality, professionals realised that services would need to be designed and delivered in a very different way. And the partnership. A new organisation was established called Greater Manchester Homes Partnership, GMHP, to drive collaboration across disparate parts of the system. Housing associations, GMHP brought together 20 separate housing associations led by One Manchester and Trafford Housing Trust, making over 300 properties available to rough sleepers. Through GMHP, the associations collaborated to set aside the allocations policy, which excluded many rough sleepers due to a poor tenancy history, and established a process for managed moves in the event of an issue rather than eviction. Mental health services, GMHP seconded a specialist mental health nurse, GMHP seconded a specialist mental health nurse to the delivery to enable direct support for mental health and drug addiction issues in a format which suited the needs of the rough sleepers. The justice system. Once a vulnerable individual was successfully housed and registered for support services and welfare benefits, a court summons would sometimes arrive for a minor offence committed in the past as the criminal justice system caught up with them. So GMHP worked with the justice system to change its interactions with rough sleepers. Often it was able to agree that continued engagement with the programme would be deemed acceptable in lieu of custody. Public agencies and banks. Navigating official bureaucracy can be hugely challenging for those experiencing homelessness because they often lack formal identification. That can be a big barrier to living independently because they cannot access bank accounts, employment, income and housing. GMHP worked with banks and public agencies to create a biometric ID system that could, for example, serve to open accounts and access income. Outcomes and key lessons. By working across different agencies to address all of the barriers to sustained accommodation for rough sleepers, GMHP reduced homelessness in the Manchester City region by 60% at a price that was 30% of the cost of comparable services. Following the success of GMHP, a new partnership, Greater Manchester Better Outcomes Partnership, GMBOP, was set up to tackle homelessness, this time with a focus on prevention through the Youth Homelessness Prevention Pathfinder programme. Building on the success of the GMHP programme and placing those being served front and centre of the programme, GMBOP now works with the young people to develop and self-report their own outcomes to better reflect their strength, aspirations and circumstances. This new partnership has already helped over 500 young people who were at risk of becoming homeless. I think that was a really, really great little case study demonstrating how well outcomes partnerships can work. Next one. In focus. Flexible delivery, family therapy. Challenge. In the UK, the number of young people in care is large and growing. More than 90 are taken into care every day. This is expensive for local authorities and typically results in poorer life outcomes for the young people in areas including education, health and employment. So there is a strong case for helping some of those young people to achieve more stability with their families. Partnership. Positive Families Partnership is a programme that offers therapy to families at risk of breakdown. A version of the model was first implemented in Essex, with 10 London boroughs following suit, and it is now also operating in Norfolk and Suffolk. The therapy itself is not new, it is based on two well-established evidence-based programmes. The success of this project has come from its flexibility to redesign delivery and rebudget accordingly at various points in the delivery process. Bridget Squire, the delivery's clinical director, explains, "I have supervised the delivery of quality family therapy in a wide range of geographies around the country over the past 30 years, since these highly effective therapies were first introduced in the UK. They rely on extraordinary commitment from the most able therapists. If families receive it, some of the most difficult situations can be turned around, but the interventions represent a big ask of some of our finest therapists. Key lessons. Recruiting, retaining, and managing therapists is not easy. The work is intense and draining. Teams are at risk of being understaffed because of turnover and recruitment delays. Resourcing gaps put more pressure on the remaining therapists, which is often reflected by increased sick leave. On paper, a team of therapists should support 40 families a year. In fact, they often help only 25 families because of understaffing and poor utilisation. For these projects, additional funding were made available to invest in extra therapist resource. Day to day, each of the teams had 4 full-time equivalent therapists. But an extra unbudgeted therapist was also hired to ensure teams were always working at full capacity. Senior clinical psychologists were also recruited to improve supervision, efficiency, and overall cost effectiveness. And financial support was provided to ensure that therapists stayed until the project's completion rather than leaving for another job in the final year, as frequently happens. Outcomes? All in all, this flexible budgeting was hugely effective. It helped to build well-motivated, high-performing and award-winning teams who achieved quality ratings and family satisfaction feedback that far exceeded comparable teams elsewhere. They worked with more families per team than any other service, about 50% more than is usually achieved each year, without overstretching any individual therapists. And success rates rose dramatically. Over the course of 3 years, 90% of the families remained together. So the value of this extra investment is clear. An independent evaluation found that these projects have already created over £200 million of value to the public purse, of which over £50 million is directly short-term cost avoidance to local children's placement budgets. And they have only cost £20 million to deliver. So again, over £200 million pounds of value and delivery cost of only about 20 million. So again, that extraordinary 10x effect. By contrast, non-outcomes contracts consistently underachieved potential and were 30 to 120% more expensive. In focus, clear accountability, ways to wellness. The challenge. Over 15 million people in the UK suffer from long-term health conditions such as diabetes, asthma and heart disease. Most experience a poor health outcomes and reduced quality of life as a result of these conditions. They are also proportionately higher users of health services. 70% of the national NHS spend is spent on is spent on patients with these conditions. Partnership. Waves to Wellness is a social prescribing program. A person experiencing a long-term health condition that puts them at risk of social isolation is matched with a link worker who works with them to understand their holistic needs in a strengths-based way, spanning medical factors, job, family, finances or other priorities, and develops an action plan for support. As Professor Chris Drinkwater, a retired local GP and a founder chair of Ways to Wellness, puts it, the link worker is a motivational interviewer, helping the person to think through what and how they want to change. The link worker will help someone, for example, to eat better, to re-establish relationships in their support circle, and to be involved in health-enhancing activities, for example, a walking group. Key lessons. Holistic data tracking and secure data linkage is key to the program's success. Data is used to improve the patient's experience. The investment in sophisticated, secure data matching enabled GPs to refer patients to the service seamlessly. Once the patient was referred, the link worker could access relevant history and was able to focus the first conversation on building relationships rather than a duplicative history and assessment. Reduce the administrative burden. All wider administrative data, which such teams are normally required to collect, was captured automatically through the automated referral form and the data matching software. Understand the longer-term impact. Having worked out an action plan together, the person and the link worker measure progress using the scale of a systemized well-being tool, which encourages continuous learning and improvement. The data can be seen by the GP, who can review a person's situation, both in terms of the social determinants of their health and their medical indicators. A bespoke, secure IT system tracks validated progress milestones and undertakes a deep exploration of patients' experiences. However, it also measured appointments taken by GPs across the region and securely compared data on hospital spend by condition over the next 7 years with the local NHS Clinical Commissioning Group to build a broad, rich picture of the longer-term impact. Outcomes: so far, over 6,500 patients have engaged with the service. Ways to Wellness cohort cost per head were 27% lower than comparable areas, and 14% of GPs' time has been released to treat other people. These sophisticated approaches are now being expanded into 2 even more ambitious collaborations across public services: Spring in Northamptonshire and Thrive North East Lincolnshire, which build on the successes of Ways to Wellness. Section 3, Outcomes Commissioning in Japan. Market context. Japan is facing unique demographic challenges characterized by a rapidly aging population and a declining birth rate. As the proportion of elderly citizens increases, the demand for healthcare, elderly care services, and social support programs has surged. Japan spends circa 22% of its GDP on social spending versus the UK at circa 21%. So this demographic transition is placing considerable strain on public finances, underscoring the need for innovative solutions. Key developments to date. In 2013, the Japanese government, as part of the G7 Taskforce on Impact Investment, expressed an interest in exploring impact investing, particularly social impact bonds, SIBs, as a way to address some of these societal challenges. The Japanese government started this journey with 3 priorities: improving the quality of public services, leveraging public-private partnerships, PPPs, to enable more effective and efficient resolutions to complicated social issues, in part due to the lack of capacity in the Japanese social sector, and finally the realization of wise spending, including fiscal cost savings. Since then, the cumulative number of SIB and pay-for-service projects has risen, slowly at first to 66 in 2019, and then more swiftly reaching 179 by 2022. In a similar way to the UK, projects are typically contracted by local governments. Thematically, the overwhelming majority of projects have been health-related, over 70% of them, in areas like elderly care. The majority of projects in Japan are on a single-year term. 32% of projects are sized at greater than £50,000, with almost all of those for which there is data greater than £1 million British pounds. Since projects are typically smaller and shorter than in other countries, some services are standardised rather than tailor-made for individual participants. In the early stages of the market, there was a lack of alignment between central and local government priorities. Initiatives were executed at the local authority prefecture level, but they were deemed too small in scale to effectively leverage resources for addressing national health priorities. In response, a second iteration of the national strategy aimed to better coordinate the efforts of central and local government. This involves selecting a subset of local priorities that would be elevated to the national level, such as technology-assisted care for people to manage diabetes. The aspiration was to establish national-level SIBs, supported by entities like the Development Bank of Japan, DBJ. This institution dates back to the end of World War II, where it was established to help reinvigorate Japan's economy and revamp its infrastructure. Since 2008, it has been focused on supporting Japanese enterprises and venturing into uncharted financial territories, which has included an effort to introduce and then mainstream SIBs in Japan. This change in the national strategy led to a diversification of providers. Since some of the local social sector providers did not have the capacity to deliver on a more national scale, larger consulting firms and private sector entities also entered the market, in line with the government's original priority to boost public-private partnerships. Sometimes this led to confused messaging, as the government tried to promote this approach to the private sector primarily in financial or economic terms. However, over time the focus has switched back to focusing on social innovation and improving the well-being and lives of all people served, since ultimately this helps all stakeholders across government, social and private sectors to coalesce around shared goals. We have another focus intervention, and this obviously from the Japanese context. And this is going to conclude the third chapter. For those who are following the paper version, we're on currently page 19. The Ministry of Justice targets recidivism. Challenge. The Japanese government was keen to experiment with innovative approaches to tackling the persistent challenge of youth recidivism. Partnership. The criminal justice SIB, known as Learning Support for Juvenile Delinquents, is a pioneering initiative sponsored by the Ministry of Justice and operated under the direct control of the government. The project was designed to attract the critical issue of recidivism among young offenders by providing targeted learning support. Just for those who aren't aware what recidivism means, because I've had a couple of friends who I've told about this and weren't familiar with the word. One definition is the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. Example usage: the prison has succeeded in reducing recidivism. Partnership: the criminal justice SIB, known as Learning Support for Juvenile Delinquents, is a pioneering initiative sponsored by the Ministry of Justice and operated under the direct control of the government. The project was designed to address the critical issue of recidivism among young offenders by providing targeted learning support. A consortium of stakeholders is collaborating to implement this innovative project. DBJ, as an investor and supporter of the project, DBJ, which is, just to remind, Japan's development bank, has been actively involved since November 2020. Its role includes attending monthly monitoring meetings, providing third-party insights and facilitating the effective communication between stakeholders. Ministry of Justice, MOJ. The MOJ, as the government sponsor of the SIB, played a crucial role in setting the objective and framework for the project. Its focus is on reducing recidivism rates and promoting successful reintegration of young offenders. Then there is Kumon, Kumon. Kumon, the delivery partner, offers tailored learning support that addresses individual needs and goals, reflecting the significance of education in preventing youth crime. I'm sorry if I've got that pronunciation wrong. It's the best I can do. Kumon was the delivery partner. The primary objective was to reduce reoffending rates among young offenders by offering educational support to 80 individuals at a training centre. The project has an implementation period of 2.5 years, running from August 2021 to March of 2024. And it involved a total investment of 71 million Japanese yen, approximately 0.4 billion British pounds sterling. Outcomes. Key performance indicators include the support continuation rate, target achievement rate, recidivism rate, and redelinquency rate. The project addresses not only academic goals but also personal milestones like language exams and vocational qualifications. To date, around 30 people have participated in the program, achieving positive outcomes in both process and outcome KPIs. The program's holistic approach encompasses not only learning support but also communication and learning environments tailored to individual backgrounds. DBJ's role in monthly monitoring and advisory sessions contributes to the achievement of project outcomes. Lessons learned. Some key lessons emerged from the development of outcomes partnerships in Japan, referring not just to the previous case studies but more generally. A government-backed fund has again performed an important market-building role. The Next Rise Social Impact Fund represents a collaborative effort between the DBJ and Dream Incubator, a Japanese private consulting firm. This 4.2 billion yen, approximately £25 million fund, is dedicated to supporting outcomes models and aims to address societal challenges within the elderly care, facility management and recycling sectors. It is a 10-year fund with a 7-year investment period and has so far supported one project, a healthcare program for senior citizens, with the local government paying fees based on project performance outcomes. Although still in its infancy, the Next Rise Social Impact Fund has made some notable strides. It has attracted new investment from life insurance companies and regional banks, and it has also sought to raise awareness within local governments. DBJ and Dream Contributor have co-hosted events intended to bolster understanding and recognition of the SIB model. However, the Next Rise Social Impact Fund has encountered certain challenges. The limited number of cities capable of launching projects has been a hurdle. Convincing various departments within local governments, as well as parliamentary bodies, demands substantial time and effort, adding complexity to project initiation and implementation. Ultimately, the DBJ hopes to play a similar role to the one that the Cabinet Office and subsequently DCMS Outcomes team plays in the UK, helping to build a market. This fund is a vehicle through which they can achieve this goal. Social Investment Fund Intermediaries role. Social Investment Fund intermediaries can also play an important role by facilitating system education, bridging gaps, and ensuring alignment with system-level objectives. Align partners around innovation and outcomes. These projects are most effective when they retain a clear focus on social innovation and improved well-being, even if the argument for this approach sometimes needs to be framed in different terms to align with the motivations of different stakeholders. Building the ecosystem is crucial. A successful outcomes-based ecosystem requires more than just a supply of finance. Government plays an essential role in facilitating and enabling the growth of the ecosystem through legislation, evidence sharing, and capacity building. System-level objectives. Projects should be designed with clear system-level objectives in mind, identifying how a project contributes to broader system change and policy improvement is crucial for sustained impact. Conclusion: by identifying system-level objectives, building strong ecosystem collaborations, and weaving the narrative of social innovation and well-being into broader priorities, Japan has made real strides towards a more structured and effective outcomes-based contracting framework. Lessons from Japan's experience provide valuable insights for other jurisdictions seeking to embark on a similar journey of innovation and impact. Now we're moving on to section 4, which is entitled Case Studies from Africa. Page 21 is just the cover page of this, and it's really page 22 that we're going to get into these examples of outcomes partnerships doing good things on the African continent. In focus, Village Enterprise. Village Enterprise collaborated with a number of partners to establish an outcomes-based partnership in sub-Saharan Africa focused on poverty alleviation through entrepreneurship. The partnership engaged key stakeholders, including the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, the United States Agency for International Development, that's USAID, Instiglio, ID Insight, the Global Development Incubator, GDI, and social investors to ensure effective implementation. The program helped individuals in extreme poverty to set up and sustain micro-enterprises through training and a cash grant. The outcomes targeted was an increase in household income, measured by consumption, expenditure, and asset growth, with the aim of uplifting impoverished communities. This focus on data-driven decision-making at all levels of delivery was a significant development from previous programs and enabled the continuous improvement of the delivery, thereby enabling better results. Despite various challenges, including the impact of COVID-19, the program was estimated to have sustainably improved the livelihoods of 95,000 East Africans, with 4,766 business started and 14,100 first-time entrepreneurs trained, of whom 75% were women. Terrific results. Village Enterprise is a non-governmental organization, and this is actually moving on to the detail here. Village Enterprise is a non-governmental organization, an NGO, that equips first-time entrepreneurs with resources and skills to start climate-smart businesses and saving groups. It works with the most vulnerable women, refugees, and youth in rural Africa, equipping them to adapt to shocks such as drought and displacement, trying to alleviate poverty through entrepreneurship. In pursuit of innovative solutions for poverty alleviation in sub-Saharan Africa, Village Enterprise worked with outcomes funders and Instiglio to establish an outcomes-based partnership in sub-Saharan Africa through the, at the time, innovative framework of an outcomes model. The goal was to establish an outcomes-based partnership in sub-Saharan Africa through the innovative framework of a Development Impact Bond, or DIB. Partnership. Village Enterprise's track record of positive outcomes, its capacity and readiness to scale, and its capabilities to conduct randomized controlled trials, RCTs, which were required by the outcomes payer for verification, made it the preferred delivery partner. The partnership included the Global Development Incubator, GDI, the British FCDO, and USAID, alongside an anonymous donor as outcomes payers, as well as Instiglio, social innovators including the Delta Fund and Bridges Impact Foundation, and ID Insight, and each played a critical role. These are: GDI managed the outcome fund and financial flows, thereby ensuring due diligence and accountability. FCDO, USAID, and an anonymous donor served as outcomes payers, paying Village Enterprise for the achievement of agreed meaningful milestones over the course of the project. Instiglio undertook the role of project manager and process evaluator, overseeing project execution. ID Insight conducted the randomized controlled trial to measure impacts and outcomes, And Bridges Impact Foundation was one of the social investors and part of the quarterly stakeholder working group, providing expertise in this outcomes-based financing model and helping to set up an adaptive management system to help ensure the delivery of outcomes. The Outcomes Partnership funded a micro-enterprise development program in Kenya and Uganda. The target was to start 4,200 small businesses and train 12,000 people. Village Enterprise was measured against two outcomes: the increase in income of those households targeted, measured as an increase in consumption and expenditure, and any increase in their assets. This metric was carefully chosen since people in extreme poverty might struggle recording income, so it made sense to measure the increase in consumption and expenditure within the household. Each business was given 3 months of training, then provided with a grant of $150. Some received $400 to test the effect of an increased grant size, plus a further 9 months of coaching. After 1 year in the program, businesses graduate and are expected to continue operating independently. The total program comprised 7 cohorts of 10 businesses, each of which was run by 3 individuals within a village classified as being in an extreme level of poverty. A new cohort started the program every 3 months, with the first one beginning in November of 2017. This was the first DIB targeting poverty alleviation in sub-Saharan Africa, so the partners wanted to rigorously evaluate the impact of the program through a real focus on data and thereby demonstrate the viability of outcomes partnerships in this area. And continuing with the village enterprise, for those following along in the text, page 24. Collaborative design. These are the key learnings, starting with collaborative design. Starting at the program level, micro recommendations. Collaboration with recognized outcomes payers strengthened organizational governance, with regular stakeholder meetings and data-enabled quarterly reviews enhancing transparency and accountability. Establishing these regular touchpoints to ensure continued alignment around goals and delivery methods, particularly in the face of external shocks, was critical to the project's success. Flexible delivery, focusing on outcome data measurement and delivery flexibility, creative, innovative solutions that clearly benefited those on the program. For example, it led to a revamp of the training curricula when it became clear that the business mentors needed more time to make their monthly mentoring visits. Village Enterprise was able to invest in a rollout of mobile banking for the delivery of grants thanks to the upfront working capital provision. An adaptive management system was introduced that tracked progress via business health indicators during the 9-month coaching period, and this enabled targeted mentoring and coaching for businesses who weren't doing well. Clear accountability. Choosing the appropriate measurement methodology is an important part of project design. And in this project, the use of data was absolutely key and allowed the project to develop a really granular view of the impact it was able to achieve. However, the use of an RCT as the evaluation method, a stipulation of the outcomes pair, did cause issues. It substantially added to Village Enterprise's workload and therefore took time away from supporting the cohorts. If outcomes partnerships are to scale in low and middle income countries, moving towards measuring intermediary indicators and or a rate card approach may be a more sustainable and cost-effective way of measuring outcomes. So an important cautionary word around the use of RCTs, randomized controlled trials, as for gauging the impact achieved, or for measuring, for gauging the outcomes achieved for the KPIs that trigger payment. Structural recommendations, data management and availability. The Village Enterprise project underscores the critical importance of robust data management and availability systems in outcomes-based partnerships. Village Enterprise aimed to rigorously evaluate the impact of its poverty alleviation program, which required collecting, analysing and reporting on a wide range of data. This was crucial for demonstrating the project's success and ensuring accountability to outcomes payers. Establishing effective data management systems, including for data collection, storage and analysis, is essential. Reliable data not only helps in tracking progress, but also in making evidence-based decisions to adapt the project to changing circumstances. It also enhances transparency and credibility, 2 factors which are vital for maintaining trust among all partners involved in the collaboration. If the public sector could invest in similar levels of data collection, the impact of Village Enterprise would be easier to replicate. Outcomes. COVID-19 posed a serious challenge to the project as lockdowns began at around the time the first set of evaluations was supposed to take place. This meant that when measurement was finally possible, some of the outcomes were being assessed for businesses that had actually graduated 2.5 years earlier and had subsequently had to manage the shock of COVID-19. So it is a real testament to the success of the program that despite these challenges, it was estimated to have sustainably improved the livelihoods of 95,000 East Africans, with 4,766 businesses started and 14,100 first-time entrepreneurs trained, of which 70% were women. This was demonstrated through a 6.3% increase in household spending on food, health, education and other expenses, and a 5.8% increase in assets such as livestock, housing, savings and business supplies. The results were statistically significant and sustained across cohorts regardless of start date. These results are expected to generate lifetime impacts with the value of over $21 million, roughly 4 times the overall cost of the project. So again, that multiplier effect. In focus, Wecyclers. The project is a unique partnership between impact investors with the SDG Outcomes Fund, a corporate, just to make clear, this is a different project that we're moving on to called Wecyclers, a corporate outcomes fund or Unilever, a specialist social enterprise as a delivery partner, that's Wecyclers, and a partnership coordinator, the Wecyclers Outcomes Partnership, managed by Bridges Outcomes Partnerships. Wecyclers is a waste management social enterprise in Nigeria that helps low-income people to exchange their recyclable waste for cash and other rewards. This outcome-based partnership is a 5-year, $1.6 million commitment to establish 26 waste management franchises. Objectives align with the SDGs, focusing on plastic waste management, job creation, and higher wages. Milestones linked to payment are centralized on the volume of plastic waste collected and recycled and the creation of over 78 jobs, paying 25% above the minimum wage. Now we're going to delve deeper into this case study from Wecyclers. The challenge. Plastic waste is one of the biggest environmental challenges facing our planet today. SDG 12, Responsible Consumption and Production, highlights that we urgently need to find better ways to reduce and recycle plastic waste, particularly in emerging markets and developing economies, so-called EMDEs. However, innovative solutions are emerging that not only help us to tackle this pressing environmental threat, but do so in a way that actually creates jobs and boosts local economies, which is in line with SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. In Lagos, Nigeria, a social enterprise called Wecyclers has been tackling this urgent issue for more than 2 decades. They serve as a crucial link between communities in need of waste management solutions and companies looking to transform waste materials into useful products. Over the years, Wecyclers' capacity has grown to now an impressive 3,000 tons of recyclable material collected across Nigeria. However, like many organizations operating with a strong impact focus, it faced ongoing challenges of securing funding through grants, which often came with programmatic limitations or conditions. The partnership that was rolled out. Bridges and UBS of SDG, Optimus Foundation Sustainable Development Goals, Innovative, partnering with Unilever, introduced an outcomes-based financing model to enable meaningful environmental and social outcomes. The Innovative partnership aimed to scale Wecyclers' franchise model and tackle plastic waste while fostering sustainable employment opportunities. Intrigued by the outcomes-based model, Unilever took the lead in driving this initiative. Wecyclers was identified as the ideal delivery partner with Bridges Outcomes Partnerships, BOP, as partnership coordinator and investment manager. Unilever played a pivotal role initially in coordinating all the parties involved, with Societe Generale assisting in structuring the contract. BOP is providing oversight, support and rich data to help facilitate delivery innovation to ensure that the outcomes are indeed achieved. The program will run from May of 2023 to May of 2028, committing a total of $1.6 million over 5 years to establish 26 franchises. Local social entrepreneurs will run the franchises with a focus on engaging local collectors and employing balers and sorters. The project has 2 key impact goals. The first is to collect and successfully recycle 34,000 tons of plastic waste, reflecting the core mission of environmental sustainability. The second is the creation of sustainable employment, specifically 780 jobs, paying at least 25% above the minimum wage, with a focus on underprivileged individuals. These measurable outcomes became the basis of the outcomes contract. Clearly, agreeing the right set of milestones on which to base the outcomes payment was vitally important. Fortunately, Wecyclers had comprehensive data on its delivery. This is a good starting point to work from in achieving the outlined goals, even though they are much more ambitious than anything Wecyclers had previously achieved via grant funding. Key learnings, again divided by levels. So let's start with the micro or program level recommendations. Collaborative design. Successful outcomes partnerships require effective collaboration and stakeholder alignment. The involvement of all parties in the establishment of the contract facilitated open dialogue and ensured that all parties were aligned on the contract objectives and terms. Flexible delivery. Building a foundation of trust among partners allows for flexibility in delivery and effective implementation. Trust between Wecyclers, Unilever and BOP allowed for an ultimately successful design and negotiation process, which was aided by Société Générale, and an understanding that adjustments may be required over the course of the partnership. BOP's role as a partnership coordinator has added capacity and focus on ongoing adaptive management and with the aim of using learnings and data to adjust delivery. Clear accountability, selecting easily measurable milestones which are relevant for different stages of delivery, ensures transparency and accountability. The selection of milestones in this case could be directly tied to the core impact goals of environmental sustainability, tonnage of plastics collected and successfully recycled, and social impact, well-paying jobs created for disadvantaged individuals. Prioritizing data collection and analysis is crucial for setting meaningful and impactful outcomes. Wecycler's strong database of information on collections and its analytical approach enabled the identification of meaningful milestones. It gave all the partners confidence that the organisation both had a strong starting point and the means to step up its delivery in order to achieve the project's ambitious goals. Now we have recommendations at the structure level. Budgeting and procurement. Wecycler highlights the impact that corporate organisations can have in funding outcomes partnerships and the value of bringing them into outcomes partnerships as key stakeholders. In this partnership, Unilever took the lead as the outcomes funder, demonstrating that corporate organisations can drive meaningful environmental and social outcomes. Corporate organisations often have the financial resources, the expertise, and the innovative solutions needed to address complex social and environmental challenges. Corporate organisations should be actively engaged as key stakeholders in outcomes-based partnerships, particularly in areas where public funding is limited. Their involvement can not only provide funding, but also bring valuable insights, technology, and industry-specific knowledge to enhance the success and impact of such partnerships. Collaborating with corporate organisations as partners and emphasising the positive impacts outcomes projects can have on corporate sustainability, corporate social responsibility goals, CSR, can achieve the reach and effectiveness of outcomes-based initiatives. Data management and availability. Wecycler's comprehensive data on historical performance played a crucial role in creating outcomes goals for the future delivery, which were an improvement on their historical delivery data. This data-enabled approach enabled Wecyclers to set meaningful milestones and measure impact accurately. The availability of such data was a strong asset in the outcomes-based partnership. Organisations and governments should prioritise data collection and analysis to set impactful outcomes. A strong database of information not only supports the initial design process, but also provides a solid foundation for the long-term success in achieving outcomes. Now we are moving on to another example from Africa, Kenya Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Project. Page 28 of the document for those who are interested in our progress on the print, and that may not be exactly the PDF pages. This is referring to the print pages. Summary. A collaborative outcomes-based partnership to address sexual and reproductive health challenges amongst adolescent girls in Kenya. The aim of the program is to reduce teenage pregnancy and enhance HIV prevention by providing accessible sexual reproductive health services, education and support via the Triggerize app. The United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, and the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, CIFF, are the outcomes funders, with Bridges Outcomes Partnerships, BOP, as the partnership coordinator, Triggerize as delivery partner, and KOIS as an advisor. One success element has been the involvement of a joint SDG fund via UNFPA, which pools contributions from multiple countries to pay for the outcomes in partnership with CIFF. So those are the organizations collaborating here. In focus. So the challenge. Adolescent sexual and reproductive health is a serious challenge in Kenya. Of all HIV infections occurring among adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa, 80% are in girls who are aged between 15 and 19. Only 47% of 15 to 19-year-old girls in Kenya have knowledge about HIV prevention, and 53% of 15 to 19-year-old girls in Kenya have never been tested for HIV. In addition, 22% of currently married and 35% of sexually active unmarried 15 to 19-year-old girls have an unmet need for family planning. The government of Kenya has recognised the gravity of this issue and is committed to the SDG agenda to end teenage pregnancy and new HIV infections among young people by 2030. And this aligns with SDG number 3, good health and well-being, number 5, gender equality, and number 17, partnerships for the goals. Triggerize, a non-profit organisation and tech platform, was founded in 2014, and it works to address these issues in 6 sub-Saharan countries. It uses innovative tech to promote access to sexual, reproductive health and well-being for adolescents and young people. Young people sign up to its app called Tico, and they can then receive Tico services at clinics or pharmacies, rate their experience, and with each rating receive rewards that can be used in local shops for necessities. Triggerize operated as the delivery partner in an initial outcomes-based pilot program for 18 months undertaken between 2020 and 2022. The stipulated goal of the partnership was to reduce teenage pregnancy. The outcome funders was the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, and the investor was Children's Investment Fund Foundation, or CIFF, an independent philanthropist organisation, with the latter also providing operational support and advice. Partnership. Following on from the success of this initial program, Triggerize wanted to continue the strong impact it was already having. So it led the development of a second outcomes-based partnership for adolescent, sexual and reproductive health in Kenya, this time with outcomes funding from CIFF and the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, and Bridges, BOP, as the partnership coordinator. Each partner played a critical role in the success of this outcomes-based partnership. And we're going to talk about which part each played. UNFPA, the outcomes funder, using the UN Joint SDG Fund funding, also brought expertise around HIV and health policy, helping shape the outcomes around HIV and providing guidance on the laws in Kenya and the right things needed to incentivize action. UNFPA also helped open the doors to the public sector clinics through its knowledge of which actors to reach out to for government engagement. CIFF, the other outcomes funder, served as a bridge between the delivery partner and other stakeholders, having worked with them in the same capacity in the earlier partnership. CIFF brings extensive knowledge of family planning, as well as how to reach hard-to-reach locations and how to think about analysing the data. For example, it helped to design the survey to identify girls living in multidimensional poverty. CIFF is also able to leverage its project management team to provide operational guidance, such as safeguarding policies. BOP represents the investors as the manager of the SDG Outcomes Initiative and is providing upfront funding to the program on behalf of the social investors. It also provides assistance in helping identify shared goals and helping design an outcomes framework. In focus, or just continuing here with this project in Kenya, this partnership differs from the first due to its additional focus on HIV prevention. Operationally, access is provided through public sector clinics, which has required bringing in the public sector as a supportive stakeholder. The outcomes were agreed via a collaborative process. The outcomes funders laid out broadly what they wanted the program to achieve: an impact on family planning, an impact on HIV services, and to reach more girls in poverty. A series of analyses was conducted to generate a list of possible outcomes measures to evaluate this impact. Finally, external evaluation experts gave opinions on which metrics would be feasible to measure, as well as suggesting good proxies for the desired impact. These included number of contraceptive services received by adolescent girls, number of HIV services received, number of repeat service users for both cases, and equity, i.e. the percentage of adolescent girls receiving services that live in multidimensional poverty. Targets were set by observing what Triggerize had achieved historically and the resources available, with input from the outcomes funders as to the level of ambition they wanted to see. As a tech platform, Triggerize is extremely data-driven. This makes it well-suited to an outcomes-based approach and enabled it to provide a good baseline for target setting. Now we have the key learnings again, divided by level, starting with the micro or program level recommendations. Collaborative design, having all stakeholders come together and align on the outcomes, vastly improves the program's ability to succeed. Triggerize, as the delivery partner, was very motivated to carry out a second outcomes-based partnership following the success of the first. Having a champion within the outcomes funder who could provide the necessary motivation for UNFPA to commit to paying for outcomes was also critical. UNFPA then became an involved outcomes funder and was highly motivated to help coordinate with public officials, which was necessary for the involvement of public clinics. Both CIFF and BOP brought expertise in the program's operational design, such as the number of people needed on the ground, which are areas where Triggerize, the delivery partner, had less experience. And finally, flexible design. Observing performance and adapting as needed along the way is a critical part of an outcomes-based partnership. CIFF's project management experience helps give Triggerize the necessary support to deliver impact and to be held accountable. With BOP as a partnership coordinator, this gave Triggerize more freedom to focus on delivery, which is their area of expertise. Clear accountability, choosing the appropriate measurement methodology, is an important part of project design. Triggerize is successful because it puts data at the center of what it does, which is extremely helpful for an outcomes-based partnership. It only had 18 months to deliver their first contract, and it was able to achieve results precisely because data was not a barrier. Meso, or structural recommendations, data management and availability. Triggerize, being a tech platform, leveraged its data-driven approach to set meaningful targets and monitor progress effectively. This data-centric mindset enabled the organization to provide a strong baseline for target setting. Organizations engaged in outcomes-based partnerships should prioritize data collection and analysis. Comprehensive data not only aids in setting achievable outcomes, but also ensures that data is not a barrier to achieving results, especially in time-constrained projects. Shared outcomes funds. The case study demonstrates the importance of shared outcomes funds in creating impactful outcomes-based partnerships. UNFPA pooled funding via the UN Joint SDG Fund and CIFF for its second partnerships. These shared outcomes funders helped shape the program's objectives around family planning and HIV services. They provided guidance on policy matters and incentivized action in the health sector. Shared outcomes funds can also facilitate collaboration between various stakeholders looking to support shared goals. This not only diversifies funding sources, but also brings a wealth of knowledge and resources to address complex societal challenges in a comprehensive manner. Section 5 is summary and recommendations. So we've had a lot of if I can give Bridges Outcomes Partnerships a compliment, I thought this was a really interesting paper they put together. Reading it actually completely flew by for me. And I think this was a terrific overview of how these things can work, both, as I said, across developed and developing economies and so many different contexts. And I think a lot of the recommendations really kind of came together, coalesced, despite the very different contexts. So a lot of really valuable information provided here about outcomes partnerships and how they can really achieve that multiplier effect over paying for inputs. And I think that's the clear distinction, is paying for inputs and paying for outcomes, because we looked at a lot of different taxonomies for these delivery mechanisms, ranging from SIBs and DIBs through to outcomes partnerships, but the clear distinction, irrespective of those differences in the financial models, has been this approach of results-based financing. So section 5 is the summary of the entire report. To unlock the innovation needed to address some of our world's most persistent and complex challenges, we have to think about system change on 3 levels: the micro, the meso, and the macro. We must work in a new way at the program level, the micro, adapt the structures that underpin our systems, the meso, and ultimately shift cultures and mindsets, that's the macro level. The case studies presented above, coupled with the growing body of evidence globally from organisations like the University of Oxford, Social Finance and the G20, give rise to recommendations at all three levels. And again, this is just to reiterate, we've moved past the case studies, this is just across the board. Program level recommendations, micro, aimed at delivery consortia and outcomes funders of all kinds, donors, governments, corporates, foundations. Collaborative design. Effective partnerships hinge on stakeholder alignment, achieved through proactive involvement of all parties and draw from the individual strength of each. Make the most of each partner's strengths. For example, allowing delivery teams to lead the technical design and execution centered on the individuals, while program managers focus on the higher level organizational aspects. Foster strong links with the local community and maintain institutional knowledge by having multiple champions, given that staff can be transient. Cultivate a collaborative culture among stakeholders throughout the program via open, consistent communication with regular touchpoints, promoting shared accountability and collective efforts towards achieving outcomes. Flexible delivery. A focus on outcomes, measurement and innovation facilitates better adaptation to changing circumstances and local specificities, better data on performance and better experiences for people served. Design contracts that are adaptable to changing circumstances and unexpected events, particularly in regions more susceptible to uncertainties. We saw that, for example, with the COVID example in Africa, just as an example of a unexpected global event which impacted on the outcome. Review progress at regular intervals and be open to changing processes or metrics being used if the existing ones are not driving the program towards the stated goal. Promote transparency and honesty in case outcomes are initially not as expected, encouraging timely adjustments to address challenges while ensuring that communication around targets not being achieved is inquisitive and not punitive, focusing on what more can be done to help people or communities better progress towards the desired outcome. Clear accountability. A precise measurement methodology facilitates clear accountability. In the dynamic landscape of outcomes partnerships, it's essential to select measurable milestones and outcomes relevant to different stages of delivery. Tailor outcomes measurement and data collection to align with the whole partnership's long-term visions, incorporating input from all stakeholders from the outset. Design flexible rate cards that accommodate multi-dimensional outcomes and meaningful milestones rather than defining outcomes as a single binary measurement. Single measurements may well be too challenging to measure to the correct degree of sensitivity. It may be too hard to create an appropriate counterfactual, and they may be too limited to capture the actual improvement on lives that an intervention has had. Consider participant or community perspectives in terms of what they feel is most important for them. Collect data that is critical for understanding progress towards a long-term vision, but do not create an unnecessary burden of data collection. Create a shared accountability dashboard to facilitate knowledge sharing and improvement. Structural recommendations at the meso level, aimed at outcomes funders, donors, governments, corporates, foundations, and development finance institutions. The system level recommendations below will not apply universally, since different countries are at different stages of development in terms of their government structures and legal frameworks. They each need to be tailored to the specific circumstances of each context. We have structured them around the major barriers to the mainstreaming of outcomes partnerships as outlined below. Budgeting and procurement. Overcoming the challenges posed by traditional budgeting and procurement practices requires a shift towards multi-year budgeting models with adaptable payment profiles. Recognizing that outcomes partnerships often require extended funding periods, governments should incentivize officials to focus on achieving long-term impact rather than exhausting budgets within a single financial year. This shift in mindset can be facilitated by introducing performance-based incentives tied to achieving outcomes over the life of the partnership. Furthermore, embracing more flexible procurement approaches, such as allowing local organizations to participate outside of rigid frameworks, will help to foster innovation and collaboration, as the shift in focus away from specifying and monitoring inputs and compliance minimizes the administrative burden for all stakeholders involved. Data management and availability. A collaborative approach is required to establish robust data collection and sharing mechanisms. Government should prioritise the development of comprehensive data management systems that encompass outcomes measurements, baselines, and existing system effectiveness. Leveraging existing data infrastructure can expedite this process, though cross-agency coordination is paramount to ensure compatibility and interoperability of various data systems. Governments should proactively engage with service providers to encourage data collection and establish a common understanding of the data needed to evaluate outcomes effectively. Investing in capacity building initiatives for both data collection and analysis will bolster the foundation for outcomes partnerships. Pooled fund of pre-financing, development finance institutions, DFIs, can play a catalytic role by anchoring pooled working capital investment funds. Pooled funding in this way reduces fundraising and other transaction costs for individual projects, reduces investor risk premium by spreading exposure across a portfolio of projects, and it also creates market infrastructure, for example, the development of a standardized template contract. Shared outcomes funds. To promote the mainstreaming of outcomes partnerships, governments and other outcomes funders should explore two models: an independent central outcomes funds within government and collaborative partnerships with non-public entities for shared outcomes funding. Establishing a central outcomes fund within government can streamline funding processes and also promotes cross-sectoral coordination. This fund can serve as a dedicated resource pool for outcomes-based initiatives, allowing for consistent long-term funding commitments aligned with multi-year budgeting models. This provides stability and predictability in funding for outcomes projects initiated or supported by the government. Governments should also encourage collaboration with independent outcomes funders, including philanthropic organisations, as well as private companies. These collaborations can diversify funding sources and bring in specialised expertise. Governments should facilitate mechanisms for outcome funders to coordinate their efforts, share best practices, and align objectives. This model leverages the innovation and specialisation of independent funders while also ensuring learning in the outcomes funding ecosystem. Establishing a central coordinating body within the government. The UK has shown that it is much easier to effect these changes if there is a central delivery unit with ownership of this strategy that can coordinate the various stakeholders across the government. This would typically be located in the Central Treasury or Cabinet Office Department or its equivalent, although it could also be located within donor organisations to support governments and other commissioners. These outcome delivery units can assess the effectiveness of current spend and can also help to create infrastructure and support for future outcomes models. These teams can also help set strategy for poolings of fund on the pre-financing and outcomes funding. Establish an external expert body to improve data quality and support impact-based funding allocation. As with the Government Outcomes Lab in the UK, an external advisory body, in this case established by government, can help to build the market by, for example, sharing knowledge and providing access to better data on costs and outcomes to inform future funding decisions. Finally, we look at the macro plane, knowledge and mindset recommendations. This is aimed at outcomes funders like donors, governments, corporates, foundations, delivery consortia, and development finance institutions, or DFIs. Knowledge and understanding of outcomes partnerships. To promote the broader acceptance of outcomes partnerships, efforts should focus on disseminating accurate and comprehensive information regarding their benefits. Establishing a network of champions who understand the key features of outcomes partnerships and their potential impact is crucial. Governments, in collaborating with partners and experts, should implement educational campaigns to dispel misconceptions and increase familiarity with the concept. These campaigns can emphasize success stories, showcase tangible benefits, and highlight the alignment between outcomes partnerships and broader policy objectives. The cultivation of a shared understanding and enthusiasm for outcomes partnerships will enhance their mainstream adoption. Political dynamics. Navigating the political dynamics necessitates strategic planning and alignment with both political and civil service leaders. Governments should endeavour to secure sustained support from a champion within the political leadership who can drive outcomes partnerships strategies beyond electoral cycles. Establishing mechanisms for continuity, such as incorporating partnerships into policy frameworks rather than individual mandates, can mitigate disruptions caused by changes of government. Moreover, governments should introduce knowledge-sharing platforms to ensure the transfer of expertise and institutional memory across these transitions. Integrating outcomes partnerships into core government strategies and fostering collaboration across agencies will also mitigate the risks posed by organisational changes. Prioritising partnerships that align with long-term policy objectives can create resilience against short-term political fluctuations and enable the achievement of enduring impact. Finally, we have the conclusion of the report as a whole. The immense potential of outcomes partnerships to reshape the landscape of human and environmental service delivery while enhancing the effectiveness of public spending is emphatically evident. Clearly, there are challenges to overcome in terms of conventional practice, data limitations, knowledge gaps, and political dynamics. But if governments, civil society, the private sector, and all those with a vested interest in societal progress can join hands in a collaborative endeavour, with each party playing their unique role, we have here a real opportunity to overcome these challenges and accelerate the adoption of outcomes partnerships as a tool to design, fund, and deliver more impactful services. By doing so, we chart a course towards a future where we can not only change the lives of individuals for the better in the short term, but also create an enduring legacy of public service transformation for generations to come. And the final page of this report is the acknowledgement section, and it would feel strange to read all this tremendous report, even though it's just a list of names. I'm going to read them anyway, because it was a truly, I think, excellent report. A number of individuals supported the research and provided input to this report. The Bridges Outcomes Partnerships team for their deep practitioner-led insights, with special thanks to Izzy Newman-Sanders and Claire Brennan, who led the research analysis and the synthesis of findings. The Global Steering Group for Impact Investing, that's the GSG, for their invaluable insights, feedback, challenge, reviews, and joint research efforts, particularly around research into barriers to mainstreaming outcomes partnerships. And then we have a specific list of names, and I think it's going to be too great a challenge for me to pronounce these all correctly. So instead of butchering the names of these individuals, it can be read on the acknowledgements page, and they offer thanks. And for more information about any of the data in this report, please contact the author, mila.lukic@bridgesoutcomes.org. And that will conclude this reading. Hope it's been helpful. Hope that these recordings are helpful. If you work in impact investing and you'd like to pass around the link to your friend, we're up to now 5 subscribers on YouTube. That would be very much appreciated. And if you have reports that you think would be good to be included in this ongoing series, this is just these are the very first episodes in a big initiative that I plan on sticking with for a while at least, then please do consider reaching out to me. It's public@danielrosehill.com, ROSEHILL. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and until the next episode.